The pastel streamers fluttered in the Georgia breeze, catching the afternoon sunlight that filtered through the oak trees in our backyard. I smoothed my hands over my belly, 8 months round and heavy, and watched my friends arrange gift bags on the picnic table. The scene was everything I'd imagined for this moment. Soft pink and yellow decorations, the scent of magnolia blossoms mixing with the aroma of my mother's famous pound cake, and voices filled with genuine excitement for the baby who would arrive in just a few weeks. "Maggie, you sit right here in the shade," called out my friend Sarah, patting the cushioned chair we designated as my throne for the afternoon. "You're glowing, but you don't need to melt in this heat." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I laughed, settling into the chair with the careful movements that had become second nature. Around me, 23 women chatted and sipped sweet tea from mason jars tied with ribbon. My mother bustled between the kitchen and the yard, her face bright with the joy that had radiated from her since I'd told her about the pregnancy. My sister Carmen helped arrange the gift table, occasionally catching my eye to share a conspiratorial grin about the mountain of presents that had accumulated. Marcus appeared at my elbow with a glass of ice water, his smile warm but slightly strained. I knew that look. He was being polite for my sake, enduring what he good-naturedly called the ritual of feminine celebration, because he loved me. His mother Margaret stood beside him, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the humidity, her expression carefully neutral as she surveyed the gathering. "Everything looks beautiful, dear," Margaret said to me, though her tone carried the same distant politeness she'd shown me since Marcus and I had announced our engagement 3 years ago. Such a festive atmosphere. The pause before festive felt deliberate, but I pushed the observation aside. Today was supposed to be perfect. I'd spent weeks planning every detail, from the handwritten invitations to the games I'd organized. This was my moment to celebrate the miracle growing inside me, surrounded by the women who mattered most in my life. "Thank you, Margaret. I'm so glad you could be here." I reached for her hand, hoping to bridge the whatever distance always seemed to exist between us. Her fingers were cold, despite the warm afternoon, and she pulled away after the briefest contact. The gift opening began with a flourish. Tiny onesies and soft blankets emerged from tissue paper, each item greeted with collective ahs from the gathered women. I held up a hand-knitted sweater from my Aunt Rosa, its delicate stitches a testament to hours of loving work, and felt tears prick at my eyes. Everything felt charged with meaning. This was preparation for the most important role I'd ever take on. "Open mine next," said Margaret, suddenly, producing a large box wrapped in pristine white paper. The conversation quieted as I carefully peeled away the tape, conscious of everyone watching. Inside lay an exquisite christening gown, ivory silk with intricate embroidery that must have cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. "Oh, Margaret, it's beautiful," I breathed, lifting the gown for everyone to see. "This must be an heirloom." "It was Marcus's," she replied, her voice carrying a strange note I couldn't identify. "Worn by all the legitimate children in our family." The word legitimate hung in the air like a discord in a symphony. I felt the weight of 23 pairs of eyes turning toward me, then toward Margaret, then back to me. My mother's face went pale, and Carmen's mouth dropped open slightly. Marcus stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "Mom, what do you mean by—" But Margaret wasn't finished. She stood straighter, her hands clasped in front of her, and looked directly at me with eyes that had gone from neutral to glacial. "I simply think it's important to maintain family traditions. This gown should only be worn by children who truly belong to this family." The silence stretched taut. I could hear the wind chimes on my neighbor's porch, the distant hum of traffic, the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Sarah's glass of sweet tea trembled in her hands. My mother took a step forward, her protective instincts engaged, but I caught her eye and shook my head slightly. I'm not sure I understand, I said carefully, though I understood perfectly. The understanding was settling in my stomach like stones. Margaret's smile was sharp as a blade. Oh, I think you do, dear. I think we all do. Look around at the circle of women, including them in her judgment. A woman knows when a child isn't her son's. A mother knows these things. The accusation landed like a physical blow. I felt the breath leave my lungs, felt the careful joy of the afternoon crumble into something ugly and exposed. Marcus's face went white, then red, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Around us, the guests sat frozen, some looking horrified, others fascinated by the drama unfolding in real time. That's enough. Marcus's voice finally found strength, but it came too late. The damage was spreading through the gathering like spilled wine through white fabric. Is it enough, Marcus? Is it enough? Margaret's voice rose slightly, confident now in her public forum. Or is it time someone said what everyone's been thinking? Look at the timeline, count the months, ask yourself why she was so eager to marry you so quickly.
I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. The christening gown lay in my lap like evidence in a trial I hadn't known I was attending. My hands instinctively covered my belly, protecting the innocent life inside from this poison being poured over what should have been a sacred moment. The baby shifted inside me then, a small flutter of movement that broke through my paralysis. I looked up at Margaret, meeting her gaze directly for the first time in the entire conversation. "This is my child," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "This is Marcus's child. This is your grandchild, whether you choose to acknowledge it or not." But the words felt hollow in the face of her certainty, her public performance of doubt. Around me, I could feel the shift in the room's energy as doubt took root in minds that had moments before been filled only with celebration. The afternoon sun suddenly felt too hot, the decorations too bright, the whole scene a mockery of the joy I'd planned to share. Margaret picked up her purse with deliberate precision. "I've said what needed to be said. I hope for everyone's sake that time will reveal the truth." She looked at Marcus, her expression shifting to something that might have been pity. "I'll be waiting for your call when you're ready to face reality." She walked away through the side gate, leaving behind a gathering that no longer knew how to celebrate, and a daughter-in-law who had just learned what it felt like to be publicly branded with shame she didn't deserve. The last guest left at 5:30. My mother squeezing my hand with a force that spoke volumes about her fury, and my sister Carmen promising to call later once she'd processed what had happened. Sarah lingered longest, helping me gather the gifts that now felt tainted by the afternoon's revelation, her usual chatter replaced by careful, supportive silence. "I'm so sorry, Maggie. That was completely out of line." I nodded, not trusting my voice. The backyard, which had been transformed into a celebration just hours before, now looked like the aftermath of a party that had ended badly. Paper plates scattered across the grass, streamers hanging limp in the still air, the remnants of joy reduced to cleanup duty. Marcus moved through the space like a man in a trance, stacking chairs with mechanical precision. We hadn't spoken since Margaret's departure, the weight of her accusation creating a chasm between us that neither of us knew how to bridge. Every few minutes, I caught him glancing at me with an expression I couldn't read. Confusion, hurt, doubt, anger, all swirling together in a mix that made my chest tight. When we finally found ourselves alone in our kitchen, surrounded by boxes of gifts I no longer wanted to open, the silence became unbearable. "Are you going to ask me?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus looked up from the box he was mindlessly rearranging, his dark eyes meeting mine for the first time since the confrontation. "Ask you what?" "You know what." He set down the baby blanket he had been folding and refolding, his shoulders sagging. Maggie, I don't know what to think. That was my mother. She's never done anything like that before. That's not an answer. What do you want me to say? That I didn't feel every eye in that backyard looking at me, wondering if I was a fool? That I didn't see people doing math in their heads, trying to figure out when we started dating versus when you got pregnant? His voice cracked slightly. She's my mother, Maggie. She raised me. Why would she say something like that unless what? The question came out sharper than I intended, but I was past caring about Marcus's comfort. Unless she had reason to think I'm a liar, a cheater. Unless you think I'm capable of passing off another man's child as yours. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his response to stress. I don't want to think that. I don't want to believe that. But she was so certain, so specific about the timeline. The timeline, I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Let me help you with the timeline, Marcus. We've been together for 3 years, married for 2. I got pregnant 6 months ago on our anniversary weekend in Savannah when we decided we were ready to start our family. Would you like me to be more specific about the date, the hotel, the conversation we had afterward about baby names? His face flushed. You don't have to. Apparently, I do. Because somewhere between this morning when you kissed me goodbye and told me you loved me, and this afternoon when your mother publicly humiliated me, you started believing her instead of me. That's not fair. Fair? The word tasted bitter. You want to talk about fair. Fair was having my baby shower destroyed by accusations I never saw coming. Fair was watching 23 women who know me, who love me, start to doubt me because your mother decided to perform her suspicions for an audience. Tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over. Fair were you, standing there, silent, while she shredded my reputation and my dignity in front of everyone who matters to me.
Marcus reached for me, but I stepped back. The kitchen, which had always been our safe space for late-night conversations and morning coffee rituals, suddenly felt too small to contain the magnitude of what had been broken between us. I was in shock, he said quietly. I didn't know what to say. I've never seen her like that. She's always been so controlled, so be careful about appearances. For her to say something that publicly, that definitively, I just assumed she must have what? Evidence? Proof? Or did you just assume she must be right because it's easier to doubt your pregnant wife than to consider that your mother might be cruel? The accusation hung between us like a third presence in the room. Marcus sank into one of the kitchen chairs, his head in his hands, and I realized with a clarity that cut through my anger how truly lost he looked. This was a man whose world had been turned upside down just as much as mine had, whose relationship with his mother would never be the same regardless of the truth. But understanding his pain didn't erase mine. My phone rang, cutting through the heavy silence. Lydia's name appeared on the screen, and I hesitated before answering. Marcus's sister had always walked a careful line between supporting her mother and maintaining a relationship with me, and I wasn't sure I could handle another family member's judgment tonight. Hello, Lydia? I don't even know where to start. Her voice was tight with emotion. I heard about what happened. Mom called me about an hour ago. Did she? It wasn't a question. She seemed to think she'd done the right thing, that she'd protected Marcus somehow. She paused, and I could hear her moving around, probably pacing the way she did when she was agitated. I told her she was wrong. I told her she had no right to do what she did, especially not in public like that. And what did she say? She said she'd understand when I was older, when I had children of my own to protect. Lydia's voice grew stronger. Maggie,
I'm 28 years old. I'm not a child who doesn't understand the implications of what she did today. She humiliated you. She humiliated Marcus. She turned what should have been a celebration into a spectacle. I felt some of the tension in my chest ease slightly. Thank you for saying that. I should have said it to her face years ago. I should have told her a long time ago that the way she treats you isn't okay, that her disapproval of you has always been unfair and hurtful. Lydia's voice cracked. I'm sorry, Maggie. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you better. I'm sorry my family put you through that today. When I hung up, Marcus was watching me with eyes that looked haunted. What did she say? She apologized. She said your mother was wrong. I studied his face, looking for some sign of where we stood. Does that matter to you? What does your sister think? Everything matters to me right now. He stood up, crossing to where I stood by the sink, and this time when he reached for me, I didn't pull away. I'm sorry, Maggie. I'm sorry I didn't defend you immediately. I'm sorry I let doubt creep in instead of trusting what I know about you, about us. I let him hold me, but part of me remained distant, protected. Trust, once cracked, didn't mend as easily as an apology. What happens now? I whispered against his chest. I don't know, he admitted, but we figure it out together. Whatever it takes to fix this, we do it together. As I stood in my husband's arms, feeling our baby move between us, I made a decision that I didn't share with him at that moment. If Margaret wanted to question my integrity, if she wanted to plant seeds of doubt about my child's paternity, then I would give her exactly what she was asking for. Proof. Definitive, scientific, undeniable proof that would either vindicate me completely or destroy my marriage forever. But at least we would know the truth. 4 weeks later, labor began at 3 a.m, with a contraction that pulled me from sleep like a wave dragging me under. I gripped Marcus's shoulder, breathing through the pain, while he fumbled for his glasses and the hospital bag we'd packed weeks earlier. Is this it? He asked, his voice thick with sleep and adrenaline. This is it, I confirmed, feeling another wave building. Time to meet our son. The word our felt deliberate, defiant. Throughout the remaining weeks of my pregnancy, Margaret's accusation had followed us like a shadow. I'd catch neighbors whispering and falling silent when they saw me. At the grocery store, I'd notice lingering glances at my belly, people doing mental calculations I could read on their faces.
The town was efficient and thorough, and Margaret's public declaration had provided fresh material for speculation. But Marcus had rallied. In the days following the baby shower confrontation, something had shifted in him. The doubt I'd seen in his eyes that first night had been replaced by a fierce protectiveness that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with him. He'd called his mother and told her she wasn't welcome in our home until she apologized to me publicly. He'd corrected a coworker who'd made a snide comment about questionable timing. He'd held my hand a little tighter when we walked down Main Street together, meeting curious stares with a steady gaze that dared anyone to voice their suspicions. 12 hours later, our son entered the world with a cry that filled the delivery room and my heart simultaneously. The doctor placed him on my chest, and I stared into tiny, dark eyes that looked exactly like Marcus's had in his baby pictures. He's perfect, Marcus breathed, tears streaming down his face as he touched our son's impossibly small fingers. Maggie, he's absolutely perfect. Gabriel, I whispered, the name we'd chosen together months earlier. Gabriel Cruz. The resemblance to Marcus was unmistakable. The shape of his ears, the curve of his mouth, even the way he wrinkled his forehead when he cried. But I knew from bitter experience that resemblance wouldn't be enough for some people. Doubt, once planted, had a way of growing despite evidence to the contrary. Margaret arrived at the hospital 2 hours after Gabriel's birth, carrying a small bouquet of flowers that looked purchased from the gift shop downstairs.
She stood in the doorway of my room with an expression I couldn't read, her gaze moving from my face to the baby in my arms and back again. "May I come in?" she asked formally. Marcus looked at me, and I nodded. This moment had been inevitable, and I wanted to face it while I still felt strong from the triumph of bringing Gabriel safely into the world. She approached the bed cautiously, as if I might refuse to let him see him. When she was close enough, I tilted Gabriel so she could see his face clearly. For a long moment, she simply stared at him, her expression unreadable. "He looks," she began, then stopped. "Like Marcus," I finished quietly. "He looks like your son." Something flickered across her face, surprise perhaps, or recognition, but instead of acknowledgement or apology, she stepped back. Babies change as they grow. Features become more defined. Resemblances can be misleading in the early days. The dismissal hit like a physical blow. Even presented with the evidence of her grandchild, Margaret couldn't bring herself to admit she might have been wrong. Marcus stood up from the chair beside my bed, his face darkening. "Mom, look at him. Really look at him." "I am looking at him." Her voice carried that familiar tone of absolute certainty that destroyed my baby shower. "I see a newborn who looks like many newborns. I see features that could belong to any number of people." "Get out." The words left my mouth before I could stop them. Quiet, but firm. "Get out of my room." Margaret's eyebrows rose. "Beg your pardon?" "You heard me." I clutched Gabriel closer to my chest, my protective instincts flaring. "You came here not to meet your grandchild, but to double down on your accusations. You looked at this innocent baby and decided he wasn't worth your love because you can't admit you were wrong about his mother." My voice gained strength with each word. "I won't have that poison around my son." "Marcus, are you going to let her speak to me this way?" Marcus moved to stand beside my bed, his hand resting on my shoulder. "She's right, Mom. You need to leave." After Margaret left, the room felt lighter despite the heaviness of what had just occurred. Marcus and I didn't speak about the encounter immediately. Instead, we focused on Gabriel, on learning his rhythms and responses, on marveling at the miracle of his existence. But the outside world wouldn't let us forget the controversy surrounding his birth. 2 days after we brought Gabriel home, I overheard our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, talking to the mailman on her front porch. "Such a shame," she was saying, her voice carrying clearly across the narrow space between our houses. "That poor young man, raising another man's child and not even knowing it. His mother tried to warn everyone, but you know how these situations go. Men can be so blind when they're infatuated." I stood frozen behind my kitchen curtain, Gabriel sleeping in my arms, listening to my life being dissected by people who barely knew me. "Of course, the baby does look like him," the mailman replied thoughtfully. "Oh, honey, you can't go by that. Babies look like whoever you want them to look like in those first few months. Features are so undefined. Give it a year, and the truth will out. It always does." I closed the curtain with shaking hands and sank into the rocking chair Marcus had set up in our living room. Gabriel stirred in my sleep, his tiny mouth working as if he were dreaming of nursing. I looked down at his perfect face, Marcus's nose, Marcus's chin, the Cruz family's distinctive thick eyelashes, and felt a resolution settle in my chest like steel. That afternoon, while Gabriel napped and Marcus was at work, I sat at my computer and researched DNA testing companies. I read reviews, compared accuracy rates, and studied the science behind genetic paternity testing. By evening, I had ordered a kit from the most reputable company I could find. When Marcus came home, I was feeding Gabriel in the nursery we'd painted soft green months before, when the future had seemed uncomplicated and full of promise. "How was your day?" he asked, settling into the chair beside us and reaching out to stroke Gabriel's cheek. "I ordered a DNA test," I said without preamble. His hand stilled. "What?" "A paternity test. For you and Gabriel." I kept my voice level, matter of fact. "It arrives tomorrow. We can have results in 5 days." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing. Is that what you want? Proof? It's what I need. For me, for you, for Gabriel. I shifted the baby to my shoulder, patting his back gently. I heard Mrs. Patterson today telling the mailman that the truth would out once Gabriel got older and his features became more defined. I realized that's what we're facing, a lifetime of whispers and speculation. A lifetime of people watching our son grow up and looking for evidence that he doesn't belong to you. I don't need proof, Marcus. I know he's mine. But doubt is contagious, Marcus. Even you felt it that first night. Even you wondered, just for a moment, if your mother might be right. I met his eyes directly. I won't live under that shadow. I won't raise our son in a family where his legitimacy is always in question. We're going to settle this once and for all. Marcus nodded slowly. Okay, if that's what you need, then that's what we'll do. But as I held our son that night, watching his peaceful sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to open a door that would change everything, not just for us, but for the entire Cruz family. The test kit arrived the next morning in a plain brown envelope containing swabs and instructions that looked deceptively simple for something that could determine the course of our family's future. I had no way of knowing that the truth we were about to uncover would be far more explosive than anything Margaret had imagined, and that her attempt to destroy my reputation would end up destroying her own carefully constructed lies instead. The DNA test kit sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I found the courage to open it. Every time I walked past the brown envelope, my stomach clenched with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Gabriel would nurse in my arms while I stared at the unopened package, wondering if I was about to heal my family or irreparably damage it. Marcus had been supportive but distant since I'd told him about ordering the test. I could see him wrestling with conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted the vindication as much as I did, but another part seemed hurt that I felt the need to prove something he claimed to already believe. We moved around each other carefully those 3 days, both of us aware that we were standing at the edge of something that would change everything. On Thursday morning, while Gabriel slept in his bassinet and golden Georgia sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, I finally tore open the envelope. The contents were surprisingly simple. 2 test tubes, each containing a cotton swab, instructions written in clinical, matter-of-fact language that made the process sound routine rather than life-altering, a prepaid envelope for mailing the samples to the laboratory. Everything needed to determine the biological truth that had become the center of our family storm. I read the instructions twice, then a third time, committing every detail to memory. The process was straightforward. Swab the inside of each person's cheek, seal the samples in the provided containers, mail them off, and wait 5 to 7 business days for results that would be available online through a secure portal. It's just science, I whispered to myself, though my hands trembled as I unwrapped the first swab. Just facts. Gabriel stirred in his bassinet, making the soft mewing sounds that meant he would wake soon for his next feeding. I looked down at his perfect face, his features already more defined than they had been at birth. The resemblance to Marcus was becoming more pronounced daily, the same dark eyebrows, the same curve to his upper lip, even the same way of wrinkling his forehead when he dreamed.
But I knew that resemblance wouldn't be enough to silence the whispers. In a town where gossip traveled faster than good news, only scientific proof would restore my reputation and secure Gabriel's place in the Cruz family legacy. When Marcus came home from work that evening, he found me sitting at the kitchen table with the test kit spread out before me like evidence in a case I was building. "You opened it," he said, setting down his keys and approaching the table cautiously. "I need you to do this with me," I said without preamble. "Tonight, before I lose my nerve." He pulled out the chair across from me, his expression serious. "Maggie, are you sure this is what you want? Once we do this, we can't unknow the results." "What's that supposed to mean?" The question came out sharper than I intended, but his phrasing had sent alarm bells through my chest. "I just mean," he ran his hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of stress.
What if the test confirms what my mother said? What if she was right about the timing, about us moving too fast, about— Stop. I held out my hand, cutting him off. Just stop right there. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of our neighbor's dog barking. Gabriel made a small sound from his bassinet, and I instinctively rocked it gently with my foot. Do you really think I'm capable of what she accused me of? I asked quietly. Do you think I could look you in the eye every day, let you love Gabriel as your son, build a life with you based on a lie that massive? Marcus's face crumpled. No, God, no, I don't think that. I know you, Maggie. I know your heart, your character. I know you'd never— He stopped, took a deep breath. I'm sorry. It's just that she was so certain, so specific, and she's my mother. I've never known her to lie about anything important. Well, maybe it's time to consider that you don't know her as well as you thought. The words hung between us, heavy with implications neither of us was ready to fully explore. Marcus stared down at the test kit, then back at me. Okay, he said finally. If this is what you need to feel secure in our family, then let's do it. I opened the first test tube and handed him the swab. You first. He took the cotton swab and followed the instructions, rubbing it against the inside of his cheek for the required 30 seconds. The motion was awkward, clinical, nothing like the intimate gestures that usually pass between us. When he was finished, he sealed the swab in its container and labeled it with his name and the date. My turn felt more significant somehow. As I rubbed the cotton against the inside of my cheek, I thought about all the words that had been spoken about me in the past month. Accusations and speculations and doubts that had spread through our community like wildfire. This simple scientific test would either validate every cruel thing Margaret had said or prove that her certainty had been nothing more than prejudice dressed up as maternal concern. Gabriel's sample was the most delicate process. We waited until he was drowsy from nursing, then gently swabbed the inside of his tiny mouth while he made sleepy protests. His DNA would provide the final piece of the puzzle, the genetic evidence that would either confirm Marcus as his father or shatter our family beyond repair. There, I said, sealing the final container. Done! Marcus gathered the samples in the prepaid envelope. I'll drop this off at the post office on my way to work tomorrow. No. I took the envelope from his hands. I'll do it. This was my decision, my choice to pursue this path. I'll see it through. That night, we lay in bed with Gabriel sleeping between us in his portable bassinet, the samples sitting on my nightstand like sleeping grenades. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined different scenarios. The relief of vindication, the horror of discovery, the moment when Margaret would learn the results and either apologize or double down on her accusations. What if she's right? I whispered into the darkness, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at me despite my certainty. She's not, Marcus replied firmly, his hand finding mine across the small space between us. Look at him, Maggie. Really look at him. He's mine. He's ours. The test will prove it. But as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to learn something far more complicated than simple paternity. The way Margaret had spoken that day at the baby shower, with such conviction, such specific certainty, she suggested she believed she had more than just suspicion to back up her claims. The next morning, I walked to the post office with Gabriel strapped to my chest in his carrier, the envelope containing our future clutched in my hand. The postal worker who accepted the package was Mrs. Chen, whose daughter had been in one of my preschool classes before I'd taken maternity leave. Sending something important? She asked with the friendly curiosity that characterized small-town interactions.
Just some paperwork, I replied, watching as she weighed the envelope and applied the correct postage. Nothing urgent. But as I walked home through the tree-lined streets of our neighborhood, I knew I'd just lied. Everything about that envelope was urgent. Everything about those samples would determine whether Gabriel grew up in a family united by love and truth, or fractured by suspicion and doubt. 5 to 7 business days, the instructions had said.
5 to 7 days to wait for answers that would either restore my peace of mind or destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. I had no idea that the truth waiting for us would be far stranger than anything Margaret had imagined, and that her attempt to expose my supposed deception would end up revealing secrets that had been buried in the Cruz family for decades. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, while I was folding Gabriel's laundry. Tiny onesies and sleepers that still amazed me with their impossibly small size. My phone chimed with the notification, and I nearly dropped the basket when I saw the subject line. Your DNA test results are ready. My hands shook as I set Gabriel in his bouncy seat and opened my laptop. 5 days had passed since I'd mailed the samples. 5 days of careful normalcy while anxiety hummed beneath my skin like an electrical current. Marcus had left for work an hour earlier, kissing both Gabriel and me goodbye with the same gentle routine we'd maintained despite the tension threading through our household. I typed in my login information, my fingers fumbling over the keys twice before I got it right. The website's interface was clean and professional, designed to deliver life-changing information with clinical efficiency. A single button dominated the screen: View Results. I clicked it before I could lose my nerve. The first section appeared immediately, bold text against a white background that might as well have been shouting the verdict. Marcus Cruz is the biological father of Gabriel Cruz with 99.97% certainty. Relief flooded through me so powerfully I had to grip the edge of the kitchen table to keep from swaying. Tears I'd been holding back for weeks finally spilled over, and I laughed through them, a sound that was part triumph, part exhaustion, part pure vindication. "Did you hear that, baby?" I said to Gabriel, who was batting at the colorful toys hanging from his seat. "Your daddy is your daddy, just like we always knew." I took a screenshot of the results, then another, then a third, as if the digital proof might disappear if I didn't capture it multiple times. This was what I'd needed: scientific, unequivocal confirmation that Margaret's accusations had been nothing more than cruel speculation dressed up as maternal intuition. But as I scrolled down to read the complete report, something else caught my attention. A section I hadn't expected, labeled Additional Genetic Information. My stomach clenched as I read the clinical language that followed. Based on the genetic markers analyzed, Marcus Cruz and Margaret Cruz do not share a mother-child biological relationship. This finding is inconsistent with the family relationship indicated on the submitted forms. I read the sentence 3 times before its meaning penetrated. Then I scrolled back up to the top of the report, checking the names on the samples to make sure I hadn't made an error. Marcus Cruz, Gabriel Cruz. The paternity section remained unchanged. Marcus was definitely Gabriel's father. But according to the genetic analysis, Marcus was not Margaret's biological son. "That's impossible," I whispered to the empty kitchen. But even as I said it, puzzle pieces were shifting in my mind. Margaret's immediate, visceral reaction to my pregnancy, her certainty that I was carrying another man's child, her specific comments about legitimate children and family traditions, her refusal to acknowledge Gabriel even when the resemblance to Marcus was undeniable. I closed the laptop and paced the kitchen, Gabriel watching me with the alert curiosity of a 3-week-old who was beginning to focus on faces and movement. My mind raced through everything I knew about the Cruz family history. Stories Marcus had told me about his childhood, photographs I'd seen, family gatherings I'd attended. Margaret had always been secretive about her past, deflecting questions about Marcus's father with vague references to a brief marriage that had ended when Marcus was a baby. She'd never remarried, never spoken of other relationships, built her identity entirely around being Marcus's devoted single mother. The narrative had always felt incomplete, but I'd assumed it was simply painful history she preferred not to revisit. But now I wondered what else she'd been hiding. I called Marcus at work, my hands still trembling as I dialed his number. "Hey, beautiful," he answered on the second ring. "How are my 2 favorite people today?" "The results came in," I said without preamble. The line went quiet for a moment. And?
Gabriel is yours, 99.97% certainty. I paused, letting him absorb the vindication. You're his father, Marcus. Officially, scientifically, undeniably. Oh, thank God. His relief was audible, and I realized that despite his support, he'd been carrying doubt too. Maggie, I'm so sorry I ever questioned. There's more, I interrupted. Something unexpected. Something about your mother. Another pause, longer this time. What about her? According to the genetic analysis, she's not your biological mother. The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice carefully controlled. That's not possible. There has to be a mistake. I thought the same thing. I checked the names, the sample numbers, everything. The report is clear. I took a deep breath. Marcus, I think we need to talk to a genetic counselor, someone who can explain what this means and help us understand how to proceed. I can't process this right now. My mother raised me. She's the only parent I've ever known. How can a test say she's not my biological mother? I could hear the pain in his voice, the world shifting beneath his feet the same way mine had during the baby shower confrontation. I don't know, honey, but we're going to figure it out together. When Marcus came home that evening, he looked like a man who'd aged years in a single day. He held Gabriel for a long time, studying his face with new intensity, perhaps seeing their resemblance with fresh eyes now, that science had confirmed what his heart had always known. Show me the report, he said finally. We sat together at the kitchen table, reading through the genetic analysis line by line. The paternity results were clear and unambiguous. The secondary finding about Margaret was equally definitive, though wrapped in more technical language about genetic markers and chromosomal analysis. There has to be an explanation, Marcus said, though his voice lacked conviction. Maybe the samples got contaminated. Maybe they mixed up the results with someone else's. Maybe, I agreed, though I didn't believe it. The testing company had a sterling reputation for accuracy, and the genetic markers were too specific to be explained by simple error. We sat in silence for several minutes, Gabriel sleeping peacefully in his bassinet beside us, unaware that his DNA had just upended everything we thought we knew about our family. What do we do now? Marcus asked, finally. We found out the truth, all of it, starting with a genetic counselor who can help us understand exactly what these results mean and what questions we should be asking. That night, after Marcus had fallen into exhausted sleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and thinking about secrets. For weeks, I'd been the one under suspicion, the one whose integrity was questioned, the one who'd had to prove her innocence. Now it appeared that Margaret, so certain of my deception, so quick to publicly shame me, had been hiding a much bigger lie all along. The irony wasn't lost on me. In her desperate attempt to expose what she believed was my deception, Margaret had inadvertently exposed her own. The DNA test she'd essentially forced me to take had vindicated me completely while revealing that she was the one living with hidden truth. But unlike her public humiliation of me, I didn't feel triumphant about this discovery. Instead, I felt the weight of knowledge I wasn't sure I wanted to carry, and the responsibility of deciding what to do with information that could destroy the foundation of my husband's entire identity. Gabriel stirred in his sleep, and I reached over to stroke his soft cheek. Whatever we learned about Marcus's origins, whatever secrets we uncovered about Margaret's past, this innocent child deserved to grow up in a family built on truth rather than lies, even if that truth turned out to be more complicated than any of us had imagined. Dr. Priya Patel's office was decorated in soothing earth tones, with soft lighting and comfortable chairs designed to ease the anxiety of families receiving genetic news. She'd agreed to meet with us on short notice after I'd explained our situation over the phone, her voice professional but kind as she'd guided me through what information to bring to the appointment. Marcus sat beside me, Gabriel sleeping in his car seat at our feet, while Dr. Patel reviewed the genetic test results we'd printed out.
She was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 40s, with gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an air of competent compassion that immediately put me at ease. "She can see why this would be confusing," she said, looking up from the report. "Let me explain what we're seeing here from a genetic standpoint." She turned her computer monitor toward us, pulling up a simplified diagram of chromosomal inheritance. "The paternity results are absolutely clear. Marcus, you are Gabriel's biological father with near certainty. The genetic markers align perfectly with what we'd expect to see in a father-son relationship."
Marcus's shoulders relaxed slightly. Even with the shock of the secondary finding, hearing professional confirmation of Gabriel's paternity seemed to ease something in him that had been tense since Marguerite's original accusation. "However," Dr. Patel continued, "the comparison between you and Marguerite shows no genetic relationship consistent with mother and child. The chromosomal markers that should align if she were your biological mother are simply not there." "What does that mean, exactly?" Marcus asked, his voice carefully controlled. "It means one of several possibilities. The most likely explanation is that Marguerite is not your biological mother, despite what you've been told your entire life. This could happen in cases of adoption, surrogacy arrangements, or other family situations where the biological and social relationships don't align." The clinical language made it sound routine, but I could see the impact on Marcus's face. His entire understanding of his identity was being rewritten by genetic science, reduced to chromosomal markers and statistical probabilities. "Are there other explanations?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect we were facing exactly what the results indicated. The testing could be wrong, though that's highly unlikely given the company's reputation and the specificity of these results. Or there could be a sample mix-up, though, again, the paternity results make that seem improbable. Dr. Patel leaned back in her chair, her expression sympathetic. "I've been doing this for 15 years, and in my experience, when genetic testing reveals unexpected family relationships, it's usually because there are family secrets that have been kept hidden for decades." Marcus was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications. Gabriel woke up and began to fuss, and I lifted him from his car seat, offering him my finger to suck on while he settled back into drowsiness. "So what you're saying is that everything I've believed about my family, about where I come from, about who I am, it's all been a lie?" Marcus said finally. "Not everything," Dr. Patel said gently. "Your relationship with Gabriel is real and confirmed. Your love for your family, your memories, your experiences, those are all real regardless of biological relationships. What we're learning is that the story you were told about your origins may not be the complete truth." "How do we find out what the real truth is?" I asked. "That's where it gets complicated. Genetic testing can tell you what the biological relationships are, but it can't tell you the reasons behind family decisions or the circumstances that led to those relationships. For that, you'd need to have conversations with family members who might have knowledge about your origins." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The family member who would have that knowledge is the same person who just spent the last month publicly accusing my wife of infidelity. I'm not sure she's going to be forthcoming about her own secrets." "People often project their own fears and guilt onto others," Dr. Patel observed quietly. "Sometimes, when someone is hiding something significant about their own past, they become hypersensitive to the possibility of deception in others." The insight hit like a physical blow. Marguerite's immediate assumption that I was lying, her certainty that Gabriel wasn't Marcus's child, her specific comments about legitimacy and family traditions, all of it suddenly made sense through the lens of someone who had been living with her own deception for decades. "She knew," I said, the realization crystallizing as I spoke. "She knew the whole time that Marcus wasn't her biological son. When she accused me of carrying another man's child, she was projecting her own situation onto mine." Marcus turned to stare at me, his face pale. "You think she deliberately tried to destroy my reputation to deflect attention from her own secrets?"
I think she panicked when I got pregnant. I think she saw the possibility of DNA testing being done, genetic questions being asked, family medical histories being explored. I shifted Gabriel to my other arm, his warm weight a comfort against my chest. I think she attacked me first as a way to control the narrative and make sure no one would be asking questions about our family's genetics. Dr. Patel nodded slowly. That's certainly possible. I've seen cases where family secrets create defensive behaviors, where the fear of exposure leads to preemptive accusations against others. So what do we do now? Marcus asked, his voice hollow. How do I confront the woman who raised me and ask her to explain why everything she's ever told me about my identity was a lie? That's not a decision you have to make today, Dr. Patel said kindly. This is a lot to process. Take time to absorb what you've learned. Discuss it together. Think about what you need to know and what you're prepared to hear. She handed us several pamphlets about genetic counseling resources and support groups for families dealing with unexpected DNA revelations. These situations are more common than you think. You're not alone in navigating this kind of discovery.
As we drove home in heavy silence, Gabriel sleeping peacefully in his car seat, I found myself thinking about choices. For the past month, I'd felt powerless, victimized by Margaret's accusations, subjected to community gossip, forced to prove my integrity through scientific testing. Now, suddenly, I held information that could completely reverse our positions. I could expose Margaret the same way she'd tried to expose me. I could call her out publicly, let the community that had been whispering about my supposed infidelity learn about her decades-old deception. I could watch her squirm under the scrutiny she'd subjected me to. But as I watched Marcus struggle with the revelation that his entire identity had been built on lies, I realized that revenge wasn't what I wanted. What I wanted was truth, healing, and a family environment where Gabriel could grow up without the shadow of secrets and shame. We have to talk to her, I said as we pulled into our driveway. Marcus turned off the engine and sat staring at our house, the home we'd bought together, painted together, prepared for Gabriel together. I know. I just don't know how to have that conversation. I don't know how to ask my mother to explain who I really am. We'll figure it out together, I promised, echoing the words he'd said to me during our darkest moments. Whatever the truth is, whatever we learn, we'll face it together. But as we carried Gabriel into the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that the conversation we were about to have with Margaret would change everything. Not just about Marcus's past, but about our family's future. The woman who had tried so hard to destroy my credibility was about to learn that her own carefully constructed life was built on foundations far more fragile than anything she'd accused me of. The irony was perfect, even if the justice felt bittersweet. In seeking to prove Gabriel's paternity, I'd uncovered proof of something far more explosive than Margaret had ever imagined. Now the question was whether the truth would heal our family or destroy it completely. Margaret's house stood exactly as it always had. Pristine white columns, manicured garden, not a leaf out of place. But as Marcus and I walked up the familiar brick pathway with Gabriel and his carrier, everything felt different. The DNA results folded in my purse carried the weight of 32 years of lies. I can't do this, Marcus whispered as we reached the front door. Yes, you can, I squeezed his hand. We deserve the truth. Gabriel deserves to know his real family history. Margaret answered the door wearing her usual armor of perfect composure, pressed slacks, coordinated blouse, silver hair styled immaculately despite it being a Saturday afternoon. Her smile faltered when she saw us together. This is unexpected, she said. Her gaze dropped to Gabriel's carrier with the same dismissive look she'd worn at the hospital. We need to talk, Mom. Marcus's voice was steadier than I'd expected. About Gabriel, about our family, about the truth. Something flickered across Margaret's face. Fear, perhaps? Or calculation? I don't know what nonsense you think. I pulled the DNA results from my purse, unfolding them deliberately. The color drained from Margaret's face so quickly I thought she might faint.
She gripped the doorframe, her knuckles white against the painted wood. "The test confirms that Gabriel is Marcus's son," I continued, keeping my voice level. "But it revealed something else. Something about you and Marcus. I don't know what nonsense you think. According to the genetic analysis, you're not Marcus's biological mother." The words fell between us like stones into still water, creating ripples that would change everything. Margaret's composure cracked completely. She stumbled backward into her pristine living room, sinking onto the couch where Marcus had spent countless childhood hours. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked fragile, breakable. "How could you?" Marcus's voice was raw with pain. "How could you let me believe a lie my entire life? How could you attack Maggie when you were hiding something so much bigger?" "You don't understand," Margaret whispered, tears streaming down her face, the first time I'd ever seen her cry. "I was protecting you. I was protecting our family." "From what? From the truth? About who I am?" Marcus looked up at his mother, the man she'd raised but not given birth to, and something in her expression shifted from defensive to defeated. "Your biological mother was my younger sister, Elena. She was 16 when she got pregnant, unmarried. Our parents threatened to disown her, saying they'd rather have no daughter than a daughter who brought shame to the family name." The living room fell silent, except for Gabriel's soft breathing. Marcus stared at Margaret as if seeing a stranger.
Elena came to live with me when she started showing. We told everyone I was pregnant. After you were born, she signed papers giving me legal custody, then disappeared. I haven't seen her since. "Where is she now?" Marcus asked. "I don't know. She said she was going to California, but that was 32 years ago. She could be anywhere. She could be dead." Margaret's voice broke completely. "I raised you as my own because I loved you, because you were family, because you deserved better than being given up to strangers." I found my voice finally. "And you accused me of infidelity because you were terrified someone would discover your secret?" Margaret's gaze met mine, and I saw decades of fear and guilt in her eyes. "When you got pregnant so quickly after the wedding, when you were so eager to have the baby, to start talking about family medical histories and genetic testing, I panicked. I thought if there was any question about Gabriel's paternity, if DNA tests became routine in our family, you decided to destroy my reputation first. You thought if you made me look like a liar, no one would question your story." I was wrong. The admission seemed to cost her everything. "I was cruel and wrong, and I'm sorry. You didn't deserve what I put you through." Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the garden where he'd played as a child. 32 years, Mom. 32 years of living a lie." "It wasn't a lie," Margaret said desperately. "I am your mother in every way that matters. I raised you, loved you, sacrificed for you." "Built on deception." Marcus turned back to face her, his pain raw and visible. "Every story about my father, every explanation about why I didn't have extended family, every medical form where you lied about genetic history, all of it was a performance." Gabriel began to fuss, and I lifted him from his carrier, holding him close. This innocent child, whose DNA had unraveled decades of carefully constructed lies, seemed like the only real thing in a room full of shattered truths. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. Margaret looked at Gabriel for the first time with something approaching genuine emotion, not the dismissive coldness she'd shown before, but grief and regret, and perhaps the beginning of love. "Now I try to earn forgiveness I probably don't deserve. Now I try to be the grandmother Gabriel needs instead of the woman who nearly destroyed his family before he was even born." The drive home from Margaret's house passed in heavy silence. Gabriel slept peacefully in his car seat, unaware that the family drama surrounding his birth had just taken another seismic shift.
Marcus stared out the passenger window, processing 32 years of rewritten history, while I navigated the familiar streets of our neighborhood with my mind spinning. When we reached our house, Marcus went straight to the garage, his refuge when emotions overwhelmed him. I could hear him moving tools around, the rhythmic sound of someone trying to organize external chaos when internal chaos felt unmanageable. I settled Gabriel in his bouncy seat and started dinner, needing the comfort of routine while everything else felt unstable. An hour later, Lydia knocked on our kitchen door. Her face was tear-streaked, her usual composure abandoned. "She called me," Lydia said without preamble. "She told me everything." I gestured her inside, pouring 2 cups of coffee from the pot I'd made more from habit than desire. "How are you handling it?" "I always knew something wasn't right." Lydia sank into a kitchen chair, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. The way she'd changed the subject whenever I asked about family history, the way we never had contact with relatives on her side, the way she was so paranoid about medical records and genetic questions. "Did you suspect Marcus specifically?" "Not exactly, but—" Lydia paused, choosing her words carefully. "There were photos in her closet, old ones she thought I didn't know about. Pictures of a young woman who looked just like Marcus. Same eyes, same smile. When I asked her about them once, she said it was a cousin who died young. But the woman in the photos was holding a baby, and the baby looked exactly like Marcus did as an infant." I stared at her, realizing how many clues had been hidden in plain sight. "Why didn't you say anything?" "What was I supposed to say? Mom, I think you're lying about something fundamental, but I have no proof. Besides, it didn't seem to matter. Marcus was happy, loved, and successful. Whatever the truth was, it felt like ancient history." Lydia's voice grew smaller. "Until you got pregnant and she went completely irrational about it. She was projecting her own fears onto me."
I know that now. And I'm so sorry, Maggie. I should have supported you more when she made those accusations. I should have trusted what I knew about your character instead of staying neutral to keep peace with my mother. Gabriel made happy babbling sounds from his seat, and Lydia looked at him with new eyes, not just as her nephew, but as the child whose existence had brought hidden truths into the light. "What did she tell you about Elena?" I asked. "More than she told Marcus, I think. Elena was brilliant. Top of her class, full scholarship to college, the whole future planned out. Then she got pregnant by some boy who denied responsibility and left town. The shame nearly killed our grandparents. They were old-fashioned, religious, and couldn't bear the thought of having an unwed mother in the family." Lydia traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. "Mom said Elena never wanted to give up the baby, but she didn't see any choice. She was 16, with no money, no support, no way to raise a child and still have any kind of future. So she made the sacrifice, let Mom take Marcus legally, and disappeared rather than watch someone else raise her son. The tragedy of it hit me fully. A teenage girl forced to give up her child to preserve family honor. A sister who took on the lie to protect both the baby and the young mother. Decades of silence that had calcified into deception and fear. Does Marcus know these details? I don't think so. He was too angry to hear the full story today. And honestly, I'm not sure Mom should be the one to tell him. She's lost his trust, maybe permanently." Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hair disheveled, his shirt stained with garage dust. He looked exhausted, hollowed out by the day's revelations. "How long have you been standing there?" I asked gently. "Long enough." He moved to where Gabriel was sitting and lifted him carefully, holding him against his chest like an anchor to reality. "Long enough to hear about Elena." Lydia looked up at her brother, the man she'd grown up with, who was still her brother regardless of biological relationships, but whose identity had been fundamentally altered in a single afternoon. "She loved you," Lydia said quietly. "Elena, even though she gave you up, even though she never tried to contact you, Mom says she loved you enough to want you to have a better life than she could give you." "That doesn't make the lying okay,"
Marcus replied, but some of the sharp anger had left his voice. It doesn't make what Mom did to Maggie forgivable. No, it doesn't, Lydia agreed, but maybe it makes it understandable. Maybe it explains why she panicked when she thought Gabriel's paternity might be questioned. She'd been living with this secret for 32 years, terrified that genetic testing or family medical questions would expose everything. Gabriel reached up and grabbed Marcus's finger, holding tight with the instinctive grip of an infant who knew nothing about family secrets or complicated truths, only that he was loved and safe in his father's arms. "What happens now?" Lydia asked, echoing the question I had posed at Margaret's house. Marcus looked at me, then at Gabriel, then back at his sister. "Now we figure out how to be a family that's built on truth instead of lies. Now we decide whether forgiveness is possible and what that looks like." 2 weeks passed before Margaret called to ask if she could come to dinner. Her voice on the phone was different, smaller, uncertain, lacking the commanding authority that had characterized our previous interactions. She asked rather than assumed, requested rather than demanded, and for the first time since I'd known her, she sounded genuinely humble. Marcus agreed to the dinner, though I could see the decision cost him. He'd spent the intervening days wrestling with anger, grief, and the complex emotions that came with learning your entire origin story was a carefully constructed lie. Some days he seemed to be processing it well. Others I'd find him staring at Gabriel with an expression of profound loss, mourning the authentic family history he'd never had. I spent the afternoon preparing Margaret's favorite meal: roast chicken with herbs, garlic mashed potatoes, and green beans with almonds. It felt strange cooking for the woman who had tried to destroy my reputation, but I wanted this evening to succeed. For Marcus's sake, for Gabriel's sake, for the possibility of healing that felt fragile but real. Margaret arrived precisely on time, carrying a small wrapped gift and wearing a simple navy dress that made her look older, more vulnerable than her usual polished appearance. She stood awkwardly in our entryway, a woman who had lost her compass for navigating family relationships. "Thank you for having me," she said quietly, and I heard genuine gratitude rather than social obligation in her words. Gabriel was fussing when she arrived, overtired from fighting his afternoon nap. I was bouncing him gently, trying to soothe him, when Margaret stepped closer. "May I?" she asked, extending her arms tentatively.
I hesitated for a moment, then placed Gabriel in her arms. She held him carefully, almost reverently, and I watched as 32 years of emotional walls crumbled. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she looked into Gabriel's face, really looked at him for the first time. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "He looks just like Marcus did as a baby, just like Alina's baby looked when I first held him 32 years ago." Gabriel settled immediately in her arms, his fussing replaced by the alert curiosity of a baby discovering a new face. Margaret rocked him gently, and I saw glimpses of the mother she must have been to Marcus, tender, protective, loving despite the circumstances that had brought them together. "I brought something," she said, indicating the wrapped package she'd set on the coffee table. "It's not much, but I thought Gabriel should have it." Inside the wrapping was a small wooden box, beautifully crafted but worn with age. Margaret opened it to reveal a collection of items: a birth certificate, hospital bracelet, a few photographs, and a letter written in careful teenage handwriting. "These belong to Elena, things she left with me when she signed the custody papers, including a letter she wrote to Marcus, in case he ever wanted to understand why she made the choice she did." Marcus's hands trembled as he lifted the letter. The envelope was addressed simply, "For my son, if he ever wants to know." "Have you read it?" he asked. "Never. It wasn't meant for me." Margaret's voice was steady now, certain. "I kept it safe for 32 years, waiting for the right time. I think that time is now." Marcus looked at me, and I nodded encouragement. Gabriel had fallen asleep in Margaret's arms, and the living room felt suspended in a moment of quiet possibility. The letter was brief.
written in careful script of someone trying to capture enormous emotions in simple words. My beautiful baby boy. If you're reading this, it means you've learned the truth about your beginning. I want you to know that giving you to Margaret wasn't about not loving you. It was about loving you so much that I wanted you to have everything I couldn't give you. You deserve a mother who can provide for you, protect you, give you opportunities I never could. Margaret will love you fiercely and raise you with strength I don't have yet. I hope someday you'll understand that this choice is breaking my heart, but it's the most loving thing I know how to do. You are wanted. You are loved. You are enough. Always. Your mother, Elena. The silence that followed was profound, heavy with grief and understanding. Marcus wiped his eyes, then looked at Margaret with an expression I couldn't quite read. She was 16, he said finally. 16 and braver than I ever was, Margaret replied. I spent 32 years afraid of the truth she faced with courage.
Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why wait until you are forced to? Margaret shifted Gabriel to one arm, reaching out to touch Marcus's hand with her free one. Because I was selfish. Because I was afraid you'd love her more than me if you knew the truth. Because I convinced myself that my love had made me your real mother and biology didn't matter. Your love did make you my real mother, Marcus said quietly. But the lies, those nearly cost me my family. I know, and I'll spend whatever time you'll give me trying to make up for that. We ate dinner with careful politeness, the conversation touching on safe topics, Gabriel's sleep schedule, the weather, Marcus's work projects. But underneath the mundane exchanges, something was shifting. Margaret held Gabriel again after dinner, and this time when she looked at him, I saw not the dismissive coldness that had characterized her previous interactions, but the beginning of genuine grandmother love. As she prepared to leave, Margaret turned to me with an expression of profound regret. Maggie, I owe you an apology that goes beyond what happened at the baby shower. I've treated you poorly since the day Marcus brought you home, and none of it was about you. It was about my own insecurities, my own secrets, my own fear of losing control. I know, I said simply. Can you forgive me? Not immediately, not completely, but someday? I looked at this woman who had tried to destroy my reputation, who had poisoned my pregnancy with doubt and suspicion, who had nearly fractured my marriage with her accusations. But I also saw a woman who had spent 32 years living a lie to protect a child who wasn't biologically hers, who had sacrificed her own peace of mind to give Marcus a stable life, who was now facing the consequences of choices made in fear and love. We can try, I said, for Gabriel's sake, for Marcus's sake. We can try. 3 months later, I hosted another gathering in our backyard, this time for Gabriel's christening. The same oak trees filtered afternoon sunlight through their leaves, but everything else had changed. Margaret sat beside Lydia, holding Gabriel with genuine joy instead of cold suspicion. Marcus moved between guests with easy confidence, no longer burdened by questions about his identity. Mrs. Patterson from next door complimented Gabriel's resemblance to his father, and I smiled without the bitter edge that had marked such comments before. The christening gown, the same one Margaret had weaponized months earlier, now symbolized acceptance rather than accusation. As I watched 3 generations of our complicated family celebrate together, I realized the truth had set us all free. Gabriel would grow up knowing his real story, surrounded by love that had been tested and proven genuine. The whispers had stopped. Peace had been reclaimed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.
And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.